Please make him feel welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for that introduction. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along today, and thank you to anyone who's watching in remotely as well. My name is Fraser. I am here for you from Melbourne, Australia. I work for a company called Fastmail, and today I want to talk to you about how user testing can give technical writers better perspective when writing documentation. So I'll give you a bit of background about who I am. So I'm originally from Glasgow, Scotland, if you can't tell by the obvious accent. I studied marketing and business law. I've then went to work into various jobs relating to customer service and administration. I moved to Melbourne about 18 months ago and started working in technical support documentation with Fastmail. And they've been so kind recently to let me dabble in user testing. And I'm very happy today to share with you why I believe it can give you better perspective when writing documentation. So let's start with technical writing. What is the main purpose of it? Well, what we generally want to do, we want to give our users or our customers complex information in a format that can be understood and is also engaging as well. There really is no rhyme or reason to write documentation if it's going to go over your target audience's head. It needs to be understood. Let me pose a question to the audience here. Generally, what do you do when you interact with anything new? So say you have a new smartphone or you use a new email provider. Imagine most of you just, you test it out for yourselves. You don't necessarily go, with the exception of IKEA furniture, and I had this issue last weekend where I had to read the instructions from the start. But generally, with most other things, you think, hey, I've got this new thing. I want to test out and see what it can do. Can I do this? Can I do that? And for the most part, that's the same for technical writers as well. When we start a new position and we get to grips with the product, we don't immediately go to the help pages. We want to see what the product can do. And generally, when any new help documentation is written, it's written based on the technical writer's experience of it, coming from the viewpoint of, well, I did this and it produced this, so this is how any customers or users can solve the issue. Obviously, there's more than one solution to a problem, but when you're constructing the narrative of the help page, what takes precedent is, this is how I did it. So as a technical writer, it's very important to think about your customer. You really need to bear in mind when writing new documentation that when a user or a customer is looking at the help documentation, they're not coming at it from a calm and clear mindset. Something that they're expecting to work isn't working, and they're desperately searching for answers. And if they're reading over the help page and it's not making sense, or if they can't simply find what it is any documents relating to the issue, they're going to get more and more frustrated and more agitated with each unsuccessful click. So what can we do to improve the user's experience? Well, how can technical writers benefit from user testing? Well, it can be used for evaluation purposes first and foremost. So you already have your help documentation. You want to make sure that that help documentation makes sense first and foremost at all. And this is step one. So you've carefully, you know what issues users are having based on what you've been told. You've triple checked the steps, and now you want to test them for real. So you may want to ask a colleague in a different department, hey, can you try this out and read this, and does this make any sense to you? And you can go from there as to whether or not your help page needs any reworking. As technical writers as well, the longer we're ingrained within with the organization we're working for, we become far too familiar with the product or the system that we use. And the longer you're working there, you forget and you lose sight of that initial first feeling of what it is like. You go, whoa, this is over here, and just general functionalities as well. And user testing is very useful from the fact that if you can sit and see somebody go through their first experience with a product, that's where you really need to be. It really restores your perspective, and that's where you need to be focused on when writing help documentation. An example I always keep in mind in terms of first interactions with something new is the first time I ever used an iPhone. I had like a horrendous history of like terrible phones. I started out with like the brick phone, like the Nokia 3310, and gradually worked my way up. And so about 10 years ago now, first had an iPhone, and it was like, how do I unlock my phone? How do I go to my text messages? How do I check my email? And just that general kind of bewilderment. And as time goes on, you become more used to the product. So I always keep that in mind when writing documentation, because primarily if users are having an issue and they've newly signed up to your product or have newly bought your product, they won't be terribly familiar with it. So I want to introduce you to my good friend Morpheus. Morpheus and we go way back. Hopefully a few people here are familiar with the film The Matrix. So as technical writers, Morpheus is giving us an option. We could take the blue pill very easily. We could wake up in our bed the next day and pretend nothing ever happened. Our documentation doesn't need evaluation, it doesn't need improving, it's fine the way it is. Or we could take the red pill. We could do some user testing, and we can see just how far the rabbit hole goes. So what does user testing usually entail? Well, from my experience, observation is a big factor. So as I touched on earlier, as technical writers, or if you're working in support, you're constantly told issues that your customers and your users are experiencing. But what if you could actually witness firsthand that? If you could see somebody, if you're sitting in the room with somebody and you're seeing them struggle, it can give you a whole brand new insight when you're developing new help documentation. So how do we go about user testing? Well, there are a variety of research methods and techniques. The one I found to be most prominent is a contextual inquiry. Now, a contextual inquiry is like a combination of like a contextual interview and observation techniques. So what you're essentially doing, you are giving the user tasks to perform while also asking questions as they perform these tasks. Data in relation to the user performing these tasks and also the questions you're asking, this data can be recorded through audio and video recording as well. Once we've done that, we want to construct a user testing script. So when you're writing the script, you have to keep in mind you want to unleash your inner talk show host, be it Jimmy Fallon or Graham Norton. You just keep that mindset that you're here to host a user, make them feel as comfortable as possible, and get them to talk about your product. To construct this user testing script, you will need to collaborate with your support team. Your support team is at the coalface every day. They know the customer's issues, and that's a great starting point to focus in on the pain points. We want to keep the script open-ended. So when I say open-ended, an example could be like, what do you expect to happen when you click this, or what do you expect to happen when you press that? We don't want to limit it to yes or no, questions, because it kind of limits the data we'll get back. We also don't want to use words within the user interface as well. Now, the reason we don't use the words within the user interface is it has the potential of skewing the data and potentially leading the user or the customer down a path that they might necessarily not have gone down on if they weren't familiar with the UI. So if a user or customer is looking for like a chatbot, and it's got a flashing tab in the corner saying "assist me," and the user's unable to find that, and you've given them the task of finding the chatbot, and you say something like, if they say to you, "Oh, I can't find the chatbot," and you say to the user, "Well, where do you think you can find assistance with that?" And then they go, "Oh, this thing that says assist in the bottom right-hand corner, I'll click on that." So we generally don't want to do that, as I said, because it will lead the customer down a path that they might necessarily have gone down on. So selecting participants, who do you decide gets to do user testing? Well, you can do this in a variety of manners. You can select participant. You can start internally, not necessarily with colleagues, because they'd be familiar with your product or software, but they might know like a family member or a friend that isn't familiar, and it'll be easier to set up a time to conduct the user testing session. You can also reach out externally as well, but generally to attract external members of the public, you'd have to offer an incentive like a gift card or cash. Now, what we next want to do, we want to create the ideal testing environment. So ideally, we're using the contextual inquiry. You want to have the technical writer in one room with the user, and in another room you want to have a colleague or several colleagues in another. The reason for this, in the testing environment, we will have the user's actions and monitored as well as what they're saying. The reason why this is split up is so your colleagues can assist you. Being in that situation several times, it can be very hard to run the user testing session in terms of asking questions, taking notes, checking the time, monitoring what the user is doing. It's very hard, nigh on impossible, to do all that at the same time. You need to bear in mind as well, if you're testing users that are new to your product or software, they're receiving a lot of new information very fast. It's very much, it could be quite intimidating, being given tasks to perform, being asked questions. So you don't want your testing session to go on too long. I've found any more than half an hour, the tester could potentially not switch off, but the feedback you'll get won't be as prominent as you would be getting earlier on in the testing session. In terms of the amount of participants you need, there's been usability testing studies show that you only need 5 participants. Five participants can show up to 80% of your product's issues and problems. There was a study conducted by the Nelson Norman group. This is quite an old study. It's probably about 18, 19 years old, but it's still quite relevant within user testing today. And they found that if you kept your user testing simple, a lot of organizations in the past, the user testing was quite convoluted and expansive, and you'd have testing sessions run on for a long time, and the issues wouldn't really relate. So if you keep your testing focused and small, and you use a small amount of participants, you'll get greater feedback in the long run. Now this is very key. when running the user testing session. So, as a technical writer, or if you're working in support, or just as a human being, if you see somebody struggling, if you see somebody in need, you want to help them. And you'll be very surprised at where your user will trip up on when conducting the task that you've given to them. And you must fight the urge to lead them on or to give them a hint, because it could skew the data. So you'll be aware of a few pain points that the user will come across because you've already collaborated with your support team, but there'll be other ones that will come as a complete surprise. You'll want to stop the testing session right there, run back to your desk, hop onto your desktop, and start changing some help pages. But you can't do that because this is only the first testing session we ran. We've still got a few more to go through. So once we have conducted our user testing sessions, we need to plan our analysis early on. So as you go through your user testing session, we need to organize and digest the results. You can apply some affinity diagramming methods as well. For those of you who don't know what affinity diagramming is, it's used fairly regularly within the field of user research. Basically, any feedback given from testing sessions are put into groups in terms of how they relate to one another. So like an example that we had recently when we ran one of our sessions was users were having issues with our billing page in terms of how to renew or how to add their preferred credit card. So if we had an affinity diagram, it would come under billing, then things such as adding a credit card or renewing your account would relate very closely together because it all falls under billing. So now we've done our analysis, we can extract some insights. So we need to think back to what was the original purpose of conducting user testing. And that comes back to the core of what it is to be a technical writer. We want to help our users. We want to help our customers, and by doing so, we need to give them complex information that can be understood. And if using user testing as a terms of evaluation in going forward, that's certainly the way in which we can improve our help documentation. We can also extract some insights using storyboards or experience maps. So when I say storyboards, the name is what it says on the tin. We have a conference room back at the office, and I don't know, the walls probably a little led just up to the penguin to the corner wall there, and it's just full of from what is it like when the user wakes up in the morning and how they go about their day, any issues they might come across. They say, hey, I want to create a rule for my mailbox, and they sign in, receive a mail in their inbox, but they don't know where rules necessarily live, so they go to the help page, and you get the idea. So now that we have extracted some insights from our analysis, what can we do? How can we take what we've learned from user testing today and apply it in the future? And to do that, what I'll say to you is an example I used. But the very first time I did user testing, so before I did user testing, I just solely worked in support, solely worked in documentation. So there was a woman that came in, a lovely woman, and we went over the user testing script. And it was in this scenario, it was like configuring your. I just gave away the story there. Actually, it was setting up her iPhone with Fastmail, and within the help documentation, and I use this a lot, and I just said it there. I say, I say configure a lot, and I've been told off for it before. And as soon as this woman seen configure, she went, "Oh, configure," and it just, the impression that she got from it was that it was a relatively simple thing to set up, but I made it sound harder by using the word configure rather than you can easily set up. And that's fresh in my mind, and I have to take that forward now. So when I write my help documentation, if I see configure, I just like, no, need to cut that out, delete, set up, and make it easier for. I try not users to feel so intimidated when looking at the help documentation. So going forward, bear in mind, tech writers are, we're on the side of the user. Within the grand scheme of things within the organization, users don't have the biggest voice. So it's very important for technical writers, it's very important for support to voice your concerns. Even to colleagues in the development department, if you see an issue and you go to a developer and say, look, I'm sorry to say, but we're getting repeated issues with this. I have data to back up. I have user testing, and I have a video. I have an audio recording to show that 5 people are struggling with this potential part. Maybe we need to rethink this, or how can we make this easier for our users? Keep your users at the forefront of your mind when writing new documentation as well, while integrating user testing. I thought the first testing session I ran was a good 6 months ago, but I can still picture it clear in my mind, because they're not users to me now. They're not just names in an email. These are people, with real life problems, just trying to go about their day with with no hassle. And you want to make things easy for them. You want them to like your product. So you need to keep your users at the forefront of your mind. And also the main purpose, as I said, for integrating user testing with technical writing is evaluation. Documentation doesn't have a long lifespan. It gets outdated very quickly, and because your product is constantly changing. So as your product constantly changes, your documentation needs to constantly change as well. And what better way to keep up your high standard documentation than evaluating using user testing? That is everything I wanted to speak to you about today, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions at all, I'll be more happy to answer them.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We have about 3 minutes for questions, if anyone has one.
Thank you very much. Those user tests you're describing, they sound very similar, and it's not unintentional, obviously, to what user experience people do when they're evaluating their product. Yep. Do you see any differences in the types of user scripts that you provide for your documentation tests versus the user experience test? Or could you use the same test for both teams of people?
You could probably use the same in some certain scenarios. I would say the skeleton of it is mostly the same. But there may be elements you may have to swap in and out.
And then the follow-on question is, how often do you look at an issue that a user faces and say, oh, that's such a glaring error that they've made that we shouldn't document it. We should get someone to fix the product.
That's a good
question. We don't have to document it.
That's a good question. We don't necessarily have a set policy for that, but if it was up to me, I would say, I don't know, every 3 to 6 months, I think is a good policy. Obviously, that's not ideal, because if you find, or if you're looking for external applicants, you're having to, because they're giving you your time, it's a nice gesture to compensate them for giving you your time and resources.
I have a question if no one else does. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Since I'm holding the mic? Yeah. I was just wondering if you well, actually, I had two questions. I'll just ask you one now because we have time. But do you combine this with any other types of testing? For example, we recently discovered that one of the reasons that people weren't using a certain feature was because it was broken. But we didn't know it because we don't use the product, that particular thing. Like, they couldn't even get to the whatever it was they were trying to get to. And we didn't actually realize it. And so do you do any sort of, say, I don't know, if you have a web-based thing, like Selenium testing or something like that, right? Do you have that as well?
So testing in terms of all features of the whole product?
Well, I mean, obviously that would be on the development side, but like from some sort of a docs, this was actually from a docs perspective, like we were having trouble getting people to our docs.
Oh, right, okay. I'm not too sure on that, to be honest. I'm sure it's not just on the support side or for the technical writers perspective when we test various aspects of our product.
Or I guess the other thing is, I mean, maybe from your perspective, being able to kind of just make sure that something hasn't changed that they didn't tell you about, which is usually what happened to us.
No, generally, if we're getting a lot of support requests regarding the same issue, then that's when we speak to the management team or to developers and say, let's get our heads together. What can we do to improve the situation for our users?
Cool. Cheers.
Thanks so much.
And with that, we are at time.